Next order of the day, accountability and transparency of unions. Resumption of debate on the motion of the member for Wright.
Well, the question is that the motion be agreed to. The honourable member for Wright.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to move that this House notes that serious allegations have been made surrounding the alleged misappropriation of union members' funds by union leaders. B. Australian Council of Trade Union Secretary David Oliver has said that every union member has the right to know that their money is going to be subject to good governance and regulations. And C. Australian Working Union National President Paul Howe said that he supports bringing union accountability and transparency in line with the Corporations Act 2001, and that this private member's motion seeks to implement a plan that will accept the same standards and accountability of transparency for union leaders as are expected by company directors under the Corporations Act 2001. Deputy Speaker, let me start by saying that we have seen over the past few months a classic example of alleged horrendous misuse of some union members' funds by some union officials. It's a disgrace to this nation, and not to say embarrassing for the union movement as a whole. Moreover, given the criticised role of Fair Work Australia in recent weeks, a better system of policy needs to be set up to investigate any possible regulatory breaches by the unions while enforcing regulations and any new powers to bring criminal prosecutions directly to the courts. In his address to the 2012 ACTU Congress on Union Governments, Secretary David Oliver said, "We have a significant responsibility to our members to ensure and make double sure that our members' money is only used for the purpose to advance our members' interest." I believe these comments to be sincere by David Oliver, that the union movement wants to put as much distance between themselves and the unsorted affairs of the misappropriation of members' funds as possible. This motion allows that to happen by making the same level of accountability to union officials as that of company directors under the Corporations Act, which is enforced by the relevant regulatory bodies. Here we have it, Mr Deputy Speaker. Even the secretary of one of the biggest union movements in Australia recognises change is needed to ensure better accountability and transparency for our union leaders. And furthermore, in his opening address of the 2012 Congress, Mr Oliver said that unions have a significant responsibility to members to ensure and make double sure that members' money is only used for the purpose to advance members' interests. We have seen these shameful actions by union officials time and time again, and it is well due that we as federal members do something about it. I can no longer sit back and watch the tireless effort and hard-earned dollars of mums and dads and men and women who pay their money to these unions allegedly misappropriated, some of who are in my electorate. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm talking about the money that is earned by some of the lowest paid workers in Australia, people who face an incredible struggle every day just to put food on the table and pay their bills. People who, for the sake of their job security, pay union fees because they believe, or are led to believe, that union officials represent the interests of their members. Failure to implement this motion would be a grave action of injustice towards the Australian people, towards their integrity and their dignity, because it speaks directly to ensuring the rights of the Australian people are put first. The union movement in Australia, as I understand it, was constructed to work as a collective group with the aim of bettering workplace conditions. And yet we've seen time and time again, particularly in recent times, in relation to the HSU, the misuse of members' funds, the denigration, reputation and the personal gain of union leaders. Something has to change. And Deputy Speaker, it's time to make that happen. The regulatory approach of company directors outlined in the Australian Securities and Investment Commission states that company directors are expected to comply with the law. It is backed by the requirement laid out in the Corporations Act 2001. So I ask, if it's good enough for company directors, why isn't it good enough for the union officials as well? Well, it isn't, I tell you, it is. In fact, it is the intention of union officials, such as Oliver and Howe, that are precisely calling for this motion because they know that it offers them a level of protection. They want to be measured by the same levels of integrity that is imposed by the Corporations Act, They want to distance their respective organisations from the allegations of poor governance, resulting in 156 alleged contraventions which were identified in the recent Fair Work Australia report. It is these findings that inflict a stench over the whole union movement. The Act also states that they are to comply with statutory due care and diligence, that a reasonable person would exercise their power and discharge duties in good faith, the best interests of the company and for proper purpose. Not improperly using their position to gain advantage for themselves or someone else, or cause detriment to the company, not improperly using information and to disclose to other directors or any material personal interest. ASIC Chairman Jeff Lucy AM highlighted the importance of these aforementioned points in an address at the 2006 Institute of Company Directors. The address of Mr Lucy also looked at the experiences of companies whose directors were charged with criminal neglect of their duty and their companies obviously went broke. Deputy Speaker, I'm actually slightly surprised that the task of implementing this motion has not been tackled earlier by my colleagues in this place. I truly believe that the aim of protecting the interests of the Australian people, and for me, the people of right, that implementing this motion is imperative to safeguarding the rights and future, and it is with great honour that I put the motion forward. And I say this for two reasons, because it concerns the lives of innocent working people that I represent as a federal member for right. Their welfare is paramount to my role as the federal member, and tougher supervision of unions in this matter is, I believe, an effective way to stay on top of our game. In a common sense approach, in saying this, I ask the question, who are the union officials? They are, as I mentioned earlier, representatives of some of the lowest paid workers in this nation. In a recent opinion column published in Sunday's Telegraph on May 20, 2012, Australian Workers' Union National Secretary Paul Howes said, being a union official should make you less likely to steal money from workers, but that's not always the case. It is a sad situation for the entire nation when even union officials admit that other union officials would possibly steal funds from their members. There is no excuse for accepting this type of criminal behaviour. I wholeheartedly endorse this statement when it goes on to say that new compliance structures in this form of motion will work to restore members' trust in their unions. And what a powerful statement to have come from a union official. Will work to restore the members' trust in their unions. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's absolutely imperative that this motion work to restore confidence of the Australian people. We have as a duty as members of Parliament to work constructively to increase the levels of transparency and accountability of unions to their members. Furthermore, Health Services Union Secretary Cathy Jackson has also come out in support of making unions subject to the Corporations Act. In her speech to the H.R. Nichols Society on June 12, she said union leaders have urged for tougher regulations of companies to protect investors, but union members need to do more to protect. And finally, in an opinion column in the Financial Review just last week, Ms Jackson said that reforms brought by the coalition government and resisted many of the unionists actually served for better governance of unions. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is some fine work done in this nation done by unions, and there are some fine people who contribute to unions. But there is a stench. There is a stench at the moment around the integrity of mums and dads making contributions to unions and where those funds actually end up. Here we have, in my opening comments, two senior union officials, Oliver and Howes, both calling for more accountability and transparency, and they've used determinations that they be brought in line with the Corporations Act. If it is good enough for company directors, Mr Speaker, why isn't it good enough for these organisations? My motion seeks that the government, in supporting my motion, I ask that the government support. I ask for the government supported in establishing, for the sake of union members right across the nation, be offered the same level of protections that is offered to those who contribute to banks, to anyone whose peak body falls under the regulatory auspices of the Corporations Act. Thanks, Mr Speaker.